The Caldwell estate loomed like a fortress atop its hill, surrounded by sprawling gardens and iron gates that seemed designed to keep the world at bay. It was a place of beauty but also of emptiness, a reflection of its master, Sir Alexander Caldwell. At 45, Alexander was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. His sharp suits, piercing gray eyes, and commanding presence exuded authority. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay a soul weighed down by grief and regret. Alexander had built his empire from nothing, rising through the ranks of corporate America with ruthless efficiency. But success came at a cost. When his beloved wife, Catherine, died in a car accident 5 years earlier, something inside him shattered. He poured himself into work, burying his pain under endless meetings, deals, and deadlines. His only reminder of Catherine was their son, Ethan, a bright-eyed boy now 7 years old who bore an uncanny resemblance to his mother. But Ethan was no comfort to Alexander. Instead, he was a constant source of guilt. The boy rarely spoke, avoided eye contact, and often retreated into silence when approached. Specialists diagnosed him as autistic, prescribing therapies and routines to manage his behavior. To Alexander, these interventions felt like failures, proof that he couldn't even take care of his own child. So he distanced himself, delegating Ethan's care to nannies, tutors, and therapists while immersing himself further in his career. It wasn't until Clara Bennett arrived that anything began to change. Clara stood nervously at the entrance of the Caldwell mansion, clutching her bag tightly as she waited for someone to answer the door. At 28, she was petite but radiated warmth, her curly brown hair framing a face marked by kindness and determination. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, Clara had learned early on how to navigate life's challenges. Her parents' divorce left her juggling responsibilities from a young age, teaching her resilience and empathy. These qualities served her well in her chosen profession, caring for children with special needs. Her resume impressed the Caldwell household staff, detailing years of experience working with neurodivergent children and glowing references from previous employers. What they didn't know was that Clara's passion stemmed from personal experience. As a teenager, she'd cared for her younger brother, who struggled with anxiety and attachment issues after their father walked out. She understood what it meant to feel unseen and unheard, and she vowed never to let another child suffer alone. When the heavy oak door swung open, revealing a stern-looking housekeeper, Clara forced a smile. "I'm Clara Bennett. I'm here about the nanny position. Follow me," the housekeeper replied curtly, leading her through the grand foyer and into a formal sitting room. Moments later, Alexander entered, his towering frame filling the doorway. He studied Clara with detached curiosity, sizing her up as if she were another business prospect. "You're punctual," he noted, his tone clipped. "That's a start." Clara straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Thank you, sir. I understand this role is important, not just for Ethan but for your peace of mind as well." Alexander raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Peace of mind? I doubt anyone could offer that around here." "Well, perhaps we can try," Clara said softly, undeterred by his cynicism. "Children are remarkable. They have so much to teach us, if we're willing to listen." For a moment, Alexander hesitated, caught off guard by her conviction. Then he nodded briskly. "Very well. You'll begin tomorrow morning. Don't disappoint me." As Clara left the estate, she couldn't shake the image of Ethan peeking shyly from behind a staircase railing during her tour. There was something in his wide, curious eyes, a flicker of longing, that tugged at her heart. Whatever challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain. Clara intended to make a difference. Little did she know, her arrival would set off a chain reaction that would transform not only Ethan's life but Alexander's as well. The next morning, Clara arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, armed with art supplies, books, and a determination to break through Ethan's barriers. The boy greeted her cautiously, retreating to a corner of the playroom when she tried to engage him. Undeterred, Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, humming softly as she colored in a sketchbook. "Would you like to draw with me?" she asked gently, holding out a crayon. Ethan hesitated, then shuffled closer, taking the Creighton with tentative fingers. For the next hour, they worked side by side, creating abstract shapes and patterns. Though Ethan didn't speak, Clara noticed the occasional flicker of a smile as he added bold strokes to their shared masterpiece. Over the following days, Clara introduced new activities, puzzles, music, outdoor play, each designed to encourage interaction. Slowly but surely, Ethan began opening up. He laughed when Clara made silly faces during story time and clapped excitedly when she taught him how to throw a ball. These small victories filled Clara with hope, reinforcing her belief that Ethan's struggles weren't rooted in autism but in emotional neglect. Yet not everyone shared her optimism. One evening, as Clara prepared dinner for Ethan, Alexander stormed into the kitchen, his expression thunderous. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he demanded, gesturing toward the dining table where Ethan was happily eating spaghetti. "I'm feeding him," Clara replied calmly, though her pulse quickened. "Is there a problem?" "A problem? Yes, there's a problem. My son is supposed to eat in his room, according to the schedule provided by his therapist. Not here, making a mess." Clara set down the plate she'd been holding and turned to face him. "Sir, meals are opportunities for connection. Eating together, even casually, can help Ethan feel more secure." Alexander scoffed. "Secure? That's nonsense. He has routines for a reason. Consistency is key. And love is essential," Clara countered, her voice firm. "Routines are important, yes, but they shouldn't replace affection. Ethan craves attention, validation. He needs to know he matters." For a long moment, Alexander stared at her, his jaw tightening. Finally, he muttered, "Do as you please, but don't come crying to me when it backfires." As he strode away, Clara sighed, feeling the weight of his resistance. She knew changing his mindset wouldn't be easy, but giving up wasn't an option. Ethan deserved better, and she was determined to fight for him. Little did she realize, her words had already planted seeds of doubt in Alexander's mind. Seeds that would soon blossom into something neither of them expected. The days that followed Clara's clash with Alexander were a delicate dance of persistence and patience. While Alexander retreated to his office, burying himself in work as a shield against uncomfortable truths, Clara focused her energy on Ethan. She knew the boy was the key, not just to unlocking his own potential but also to breaking through the walls Alexander had built around himself. Clara approached each day with creativity and determination, tailoring activities to engage Ethan's interests while subtly encouraging communication. One morning, she brought out a large roll of paper and set it up on the floor of the playroom. "Today," she announced cheerfully, "we're going to make a mural." Ethan watched from the doorway, his arms crossed defensively. "What's a mural?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like a big picture we create together," Clara explained, kneeling beside him. "We can draw anything we want. Trees, animals, spaceships, whatever you dream of." Hesitantly, Ethan stepped closer, picking up a marker. At first, his contributions were tentative, a few wobbly lines here and there, but as Clara added vibrant colors and playful shapes, his confidence grew. By the end of the session, the mural was a riot of color and imagination, filled with rockets, dinosaurs, and smiling suns. "That's amazing!" Clara exclaimed, pointing to a particularly intricate spaceship Ethan had drawn. "Did you design this yourself?" Ethan nodded shyly, a hint of pride flickering across his face. For the first time, Clara saw glimpses of the bright, curious child hidden beneath layers of neglect. These moments became more frequent as weeks passed. During music sessions, Ethan giggled uncontrollably when Clara played silly songs on the piano. Outdoors, he chased butterflies and collected leaves, eagerly showing Clara his treasures. Each interaction reinforced her belief that Ethan wasn't autistic. He was simply starved for connection. But despite these breakthroughs, shadows lingered. Whenever Alexander appeared, Ethan tensed, retreating into silence. It was clear the boy adored his father yet feared disappointing him. Clara realized that helping Ethan fully heal would require addressing the root cause of his pain. Alexander's emotional distance. Alexander's skepticism toward Clara's methods only deepened as he observed their unconventional approach. To him, her tactics seemed chaotic and indulgent, a far cry from the structured routines recommended by specialists. He voiced his disapproval during one particularly tense dinner. "Why is my son finger painting instead of practicing math drills?" he demanded, glaring at Clara across the table. "He's falling behind academically because of your so-called creative activities." Clara took a steadying breath before responding. "Sir, academic skills are important, but they're not everything. Right now, Ethan needs to feel safe and loved. Once he trusts us, learning will come naturally. And what qualifies you to decide what he needs?" Alexander shot back, his tone sharp. "You've been here less than a month. Do you honestly think you know better than trained professionals?" "I'm not dismissing their expertise," Clara replied evenly. "But I do believe labels can sometimes obscure the truth. Ethan isn't defined by a diagnosis. He's a child who craves attention and affection. If we focus solely on managing symptoms without addressing the underlying issue, we're failing him." Her words struck a nerve. Alexander opened his mouth to argue but stopped short, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. Doubt about the specialists, about himself, and perhaps even about the narrative he'd constructed around Ethan's struggles. Though he said nothing, Clara sensed a shift. The seed she'd planted was beginning to take root. As Clara continued working with Ethan, patterns emerged that further contradicted the autism diagnosis. While Ethan occasionally exhibited repetitive behaviors or difficulty expressing emotions verbally, these traits often disappeared in moments of genuine connection. For instance, during bedtime stories, he snuggled close to Clara, eagerly turning pages and asking questions about the characters. In contrast, when left alone with a therapist, he withdrew completely. One afternoon, while reviewing Ethan's medical records, Clara stumbled upon notes from early evaluations. Several doctors had mentioned inconsistencies in his behavior, suggesting possible misdiagnosis. One report even noted, "Child demonstrates strong attachment to caregiver. Symptoms may stem from environmental factors rather than neurological conditions." Clara's heart raced as she absorbed the information. This wasn't definitive proof, but it supported her suspicions. Ethan's challenges weren't rooted in autism, they were a response to neglect and loss. And if she could convince Alexander of this truth, it might change everything. Meanwhile, Clara's growing bond with Ethan began to unsettle Alexander. Watching them laugh together, share secrets, and build memories stirred feelings he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Jealousy, longing, and guilt. He tried to rationalize his discomfort, telling himself it was merely concern for Ethan's well-being. But deep down, he knew better. One evening, as Clara tucked Ethan into bed, Alexander lingered in the doorway, observing silently. When Ethan whispered, "I love you, Clara," his voice cracked slightly, revealing vulnerability Alexander hadn't heard in years. Clara smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Ethan's forehead. "I love you too, sweetheart. Now sleep tight." As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Alexander, who stood frozen in the doorway. His expression was inscrutable, but his eyes betrayed a storm of conflicting emotions. "You seem to have a way with him," he said stiffly, stepping aside to let her pass. "He makes it easy," Clara replied, pausing to meet his gaze. "All children want is to be seen, sir, to know they matter." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alexander didn't respond, but the tension between them thickened, charged with unspoken questions and unresolved feelings. By the end of the month, Clara's influence on Ethan was undeniable. He spoke more freely, smiled more often, and showed signs of emotional resilience. Yet every step forward highlighted the gaping void left by Alexander's absence. Clara knew confronting him directly was risky, but necessary. Late one night, after putting Ethan to bed, Clara knocked softly on Alexander's study door. "May I speak with you, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. Alexander looked up from his laptop, surprised by her boldness. "This had better be important." "It is," Clara said firmly, stepping inside. "It's about Ethan and you." For the first time since her arrival, Alexander listened intently as Clara laid out her observations, her suspicions, and her plea for change. What happened next would alter the course of all their lives forever. The air in Alexander's study was heavy with tension as Clara stood before him, her hands clasped tightly to steady their trembling. The room smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, its opulence a stark contrast to the raw vulnerability she felt. This was it, the moment she'd been building toward since her arrival at the Caldwell estate. She had no illusions about how this conversation might end, but one thing was certain. Staying silent wasn't an option. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with a mix of curiosity and irritation. "You said this was important," he prompted, his tone clipped. "What is it?" Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "Sir, I need to talk to you about Ethan, and about us." "Us?" Alexander repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware there was an US." "There isn't. Not yet," Clara clarified quickly, flushing slightly. "But that's part of the problem. You're not just Ethan's father. You're his whole world. And right now, your absence is tearing him apart." Alexander stiffened, his jaw tightening. "Are you suggesting I'm neglecting my son?" "I'm saying you're afraid to face him," Clara replied bluntly, refusing to soften her words. "Afraid to see the pain in his eyes because it reminds you of your own. But avoiding him doesn't protect either of you, it only makes things worse." For a long moment, Alexander said nothing, his gaze piercing as though trying to dissect her motives. Finally he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "And what gives you the right to judge me, to waltz into our lives and decide what's best for my family?" "I'm not judging you," Clara said softly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm asking you to look beyond the diagnosis, to see Ethan for who he really is. He's not autistic, sir. At least, not in the way you've been led to believe." Alexander froze, his expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" "I've spent weeks observing him," Clara continued, her voice firm but compassionate. "Yes, he struggles to communicate sometimes, and yes, he retreats into himself when he's overwhelmed. But those behaviors aren't consistent with autism. They're responses to emotional neglect. Ethan craves connection, love, attention. He doesn't need therapists or rigid routines. He needs you." Her words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the silence that followed. Alexander stared at her, his mind racing as fragments of memory surfaced. Ethan's tentative smiles, his quiet pleas for attention, the way he lit up whenever Alexander entered a room. Could it be true? Had he misread his son's struggles all along? "No," Alexander said finally, shaking his head as though to dispel the thought. "You're wrong. The doctors wouldn't make such a mistake." "The doctors aren't infallible," Clara countered gently. "They see symptoms, not stories. They don't know what it's like to lose someone you love, or to carry that grief alone. But I do, and so does Ethan." Her admission caught him off guard. For the first time, Alexander saw Clara not just as a nanny but as a person shaped by loss and resilience. Her empathy wasn't mere professionalism, it was personal. "I'm not saying this will be easy," Clara added, her voice tinged with urgency. "Loving someone means letting them in, even when it hurts. But if you don't try, if you keep pushing him away, you'll lose him forever." Alexander's defenses crumbled under the weight of her words. His chest tightened, and for a brief, agonizing moment, he thought he might cry. Instead, he turned away, staring out the window at the darkened gardens below. "Why are you doing this?" he asked hoarsely, his voice barely audible. "Why do you care so much?" "Because I've seen what happens when children grow up feeling invisible," Clara replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "It breaks them, and Ethan deserves better than that. So do you." That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. Clara's words echoed in his mind, relentless and unyielding. He wandered the halls of the mansion, restless and haunted by memories he'd tried so hard to bury. Catherine's laughter rang in his ears, her gentle reminders to spend more time with Ethan cutting deeper than any accusation ever could. He found himself outside Ethan's bedroom, pausing in the doorway as moonlight spilled across the boy's sleeping form. Even in slumber, Ethan looked small and fragile, clutching a stuffed bear close to his chest. Alexander's heart ached at the sight, guilt pressing down on him like a physical weight. Was Clara right? Had he allowed grief to blind him, to the point where he failed to recognize his son's cries for help? The thought terrified him, not just because of what it meant for Ethan but because of what it revealed about himself. He prided himself on being strong, capable, in control. Yet here he was, undone by the simple truth that his son needed him. The next morning, Alexander sought Clara out in the kitchen, where she was preparing breakfast. She glanced up as he entered, startled by his presence. "Sir?" she asked cautiously. "I want to understand," he said abruptly, his tone softer than usual. "Tell me what I should do differently." Clara blinked, momentarily taken aback by his request. Then she smiled faintly, setting aside her spatula. "Start small. Spend time with him, real time. Play games, read stories, go for walks. Let him lead and follow his cues. Most importantly, show him you're listening." "And if I mess up?" Alexander asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "You will," Clara admitted honestly. "We all do. But the fact that you're willing to try, that's what matters most." Her reassurance eased some of the tension in Alexander's shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. A fragile, tentative thing, but hope nonetheless. Over the following weeks, Alexander began making changes, however awkwardly. He joined Ethan and Clara during playtime, attempting to build towers with blocks despite his lack of coordination. He attended bedtime stories, stumbling over the words but persevering when Ethan giggled at his mistakes. Slowly, painfully, he learned to lower his guard, allowing himself to be vulnerable in ways he hadn't thought possible. Ethan responded in kind, blossoming under his father's newfound attentiveness. His once guarded demeanor softened, replaced by bursts of laughter and spontaneous hugs. One evening, as they colored together at the dining table, Ethan looked up and said simply, "I missed you, Daddy." The words struck Alexander like a lightning bolt, leaving him momentarily speechless. When he finally managed to reply, "I missed you too, buddy," his voice cracked with emotion. Clara watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but seeing Alexander and Ethan reconnect gave her faith that healing was possible. Growing tension between Clara and Alexander. As Alexander grew closer to Ethan, his feelings toward Clara became increasingly complicated. He admired her strength, her wisdom, her unwavering belief in him and his son. Yet those same qualities unnerved him, stirring emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Catherine's death. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens with Ethan, Alexander turned to Clara suddenly. "Why haven't you given up on us?" he asked, his tone almost accusing. Clara hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Because giving up isn't in my nature," she replied finally. "And because I believe people can change, if they're willing to fight for it." Her answer lingered between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Alexander wanted to say more, to thank her, to apologize, to confess the turmoil raging inside him. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he nodded curtly and changed the subject, retreating behind the walls he'd worked so hard to dismantle. Clara sighed inwardly, recognizing the signs of a man torn between desire and fear. She knew better than to push him, but she also knew that unresolved feelings had a way of surfacing when least expected. Little did they realize, the storm brewing between them would soon collide with external pressures, forcing them to confront truths neither was ready to face. The weeks that followed Clara's bold confrontation with Alexander marked a period of cautious progress and growing tension. As Alexander began to rebuild his relationship with Ethan, the dynamics within the Caldwell household shifted in subtle but profound ways. Yet, amid these changes, unresolved feelings between Clara and Alexander simmered beneath the surface, threatening to complicate their fragile partnership. Clara continued to guide both Alexander and Ethan through this delicate process of healing. She introduced structured yet flexible routines designed to strengthen their bond without stifling spontaneity. Mornings began with shared breakfasts, afternoons were filled with outdoor play or creative projects, and evenings ended with family story time. Each activity was carefully crafted to foster connection while giving Alexander space to adapt at his own pace. One sunny afternoon, Clara organized a scavenger hunt in the estate's sprawling gardens. Armed with a list of items to find, feathers, leaves, pine cones, Alexander and Ethan set off together, laughing as they raced to collect treasures. For the first time in years, Alexander felt light, unburdened by the weight of expectations. Watching Ethan's face light up with joy reminded him of simpler times before grief had consumed him. "You're good at this," Clara remarked later, joining them on the grass as they examined their findings. "He loves having you here." Alexander glanced at her, his expression softening. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've been patient." "It's not about patience," Clara replied gently. "It's about believing in people, even when they don't believe in themselves." Her words lingered, stirring something deep within Alexander. He wanted to thank her, to acknowledge how much she'd changed his life, but pride held him back. Instead, he nodded stiffly and turned his attention back to Ethan, who was proudly displaying a particularly large pine cone. As days turned into weeks, Alexander found himself rediscovering parts of himself he thought were lost forever. Playing catch with Ethan in the backyard brought back memories of tossing a football with his father as a boy. Reading bedtime stories rekindled the warmth he'd once felt reading to Catherine during quiet evenings at home. These moments weren't just about reconnecting with Ethan. They were about reclaiming pieces of his identity that grief had buried. One evening, as he tucked Ethan into bed, the boy looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Will you stay until I fall asleep, Daddy?" Alexander hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, buddy." He sat beside Ethan, brushing stray strands of hair from his forehead. As Ethan drifted off, his breathing slow and steady, Alexander felt an overwhelming surge of love and guilt. How had he let so much time slip away? When Clara peeked into the room later to check on them, she found Alexander still sitting there, gazing at his sleeping son with tears in his eyes. Her heart ached for him, knowing how hard it must be to confront years of regret. Silently, she pulled the door shut, giving him privacy to process his emotions. Despite their progress, unresolved feelings between Clara and Alexander continued to simmer. Their interactions became increasingly charged, tinged with unspoken attraction and mutual respect. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, they found themselves alone in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side. "You've done more for us than anyone ever has," Alexander said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Clara replied softly, rinsing a plate under the faucet. "Seeing Ethan happy is reward enough." "But what about you?" Alexander pressed, his voice low. "What do you want?" Clara froze, startled by the question. Slowly, she turned to face him, her cheeks flushing under his intense gaze. I want to make a difference, to help people find their way back to each other." "And have you found your way back to yourself?" Alexander asked quietly, stepping closer. The air between them crackled with tension, electric and undeniable. Clara swallowed hard, acutely aware of how close he was standing. "I'm trying," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Before either could say more, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, Ethan calling out for water. The spell was broken, and they quickly resumed their tasks, avoiding each other's eyes. While Alexander and Clara navigated their complicated dynamic, external pressures began to mount. A nosy relative, Alexander's sister-in-law, Margaret, visited the estate, ostensibly to check on Ethan but clearly suspicious of Clara's role in the household. "Who exactly are you again?" Margaret asked pointedly during lunch, her tone dripping with condescension. "Another nanny? Or perhaps something more?" "I'm here to care for Ethan," Clara replied calmly. refusing to rise to the bait. That's all. Margaret raised an eyebrow, glancing meaningfully at Alexander. Interesting choice, considering your track record with caregivers. Most don't last longer than a month. This arrangement is working well, Alexander interjected firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Clara stays. Though Margaret eventually backed down, her visit planted seeds of doubt in Alexander's mind. What would others think if they discovered the depth of his reliance on Clara? Or worse, the growing affection he felt for her. The thought unsettled him, adding another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation. Despite these challenges, the bond between Clara, Alexander, and Ethan grew stronger with each passing day. However, cracks in their newfound harmony began to show. Clara sensed that Alexander's emotional walls hadn't fully come down. He still struggled to open up, even to her. Meanwhile, Alexander grappled with conflicting desires. His growing feelings for Clara clashed with his fear of vulnerability. One stormy night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Ethan became inconsolable, crying uncontrollably despite Clara's best efforts to calm him. Desperate, she called for Alexander, hoping he might provide the comfort Ethan desperately needed. Little did she realize, this moment would force Alexander to confront not only his role as a father, but also his feelings for Clara, and the future he wanted for all three of them. The storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the darkened estate in brief, blinding flashes. Inside, Ethan's cries echoed through the halls, sharp and desperate, cutting straight to Clara's heart. She had tried everything, rocking him, singing softly, offering his favorite stuffed bear, but nothing seemed to soothe him. The thunder was relentless, shaking the windows and amplifying his terror. Clara paced the nursery, her own nerves fraying as she struggled to remain calm for Ethan's sake. But deep down, she knew there was only one person who could truly reach him now. "Ethan," she murmured, kneeling beside him as he clung to her, trembling. "Your daddy loves you so much. Do you think he might help us feel better?" Ethan's wide, tear-filled eyes met hers, and though he didn't speak, his grip tightened around her neck. It was a plea, silent but unmistakable. Taking a deep breath, Clara left the room and hurried down the hall to Alexander's study. She knocked sharply, pushing open the heavy door without waiting for a response. Alexander sat at his desk, staring blankly at a stack of papers, clearly distracted by the storm. "Sir, I need your help," Clara said urgently, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "Ethan needs you." Alexander looked up, startled by the intensity in her tone. "What's wrong?" "He's scared. Really scared," Clara explained quickly. "The thunder has him worked up, and he won't calm down. He needs you, sir. Only you can make him feel safe right now." For a moment, Alexander hesitated, his expression conflicted. Fear flickered in his eyes, not of the storm but of failing his son yet again. What if he couldn't fix this? What if he made things worse? Clara stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You can do this," she assured him, her voice soft but firm. "He trusts you. Just hold him. Let him know you're here." Her touch grounded him, anchoring him to the present. With a resolute nod, Alexander stood and followed her back to the nursery. When they entered the room, Ethan was curled into a ball on his bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Clara knelt beside him, whispering reassurances as Alexander approached cautiously. For a moment, he simply stood there, frozen by the weight of the moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and gathered his son into his arms. Ethan stiffened at first, startled by the unfamiliar embrace, but within seconds, he melted against his father's chest, clutching him tightly. Alexander held him close, rocking gently as he pressed kisses to the top of Ethan's head. "It's okay, buddy," Alexander murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's here. I've got you." Ethan's sobs began to subside, replaced by shaky breaths as he nestled deeper into Alexander's arms. Clara watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the raw, unguarded love between father and son. "You're amazing," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fading thunder. Alexander glanced at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No," he replied hoarsely. "We're amazing. You showed me how to be here. For him, for us." In that moment, something shifted irrevocably. The walls Alexander had built around his heart crumbled completely, leaving behind a man determined to reclaim not just his role as a father, but also his humanity. And as Clara looked at him, seeing the vulnerability and strength in equal measure, she realized she'd fallen in love with him. Not the distant, guarded version of himself, but the man he was becoming. After Ethan finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the storm and the emotional release, Alexander and Clara lingered in the hallway outside the nursery. The house was quiet now, save for the occasional rumble of distant thunder. "I owe you an apology," Alexander began, his voice low and earnest. "I doubted you when you first came here. I thought you were too idealistic, too hopeful. But you were right about everything, from Ethan's struggles to my failures as a father." Clara shook her head, brushing away a stray tear. "You don't owe me anything. You've done the hardest part, you stepped up. That's what matters." "But you made it possible," Alexander insisted, stepping closer. "Without you, I wouldn't have seen what I was missing. You saved us, Clara. Both of us." His words hung in the air, charged with meaning. Clara swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. Before she could speak, Alexander continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I want you to stay, not just as Ethan's nanny, but as part of our family, as someone who matters to me, to us." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of hearing those words, yet now that they were spoken, she felt overwhelmed by their weight. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, searching his eyes for any trace of hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Alexander replied, reaching for her hand. "Stay with us, Clara. Help me keep learning, keep growing. Together." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, unable to find the words to express the depth of her gratitude and her love. Instead, she stepped forward, allowing him to pull her into an embrace. For the first time, neither of them felt the need to hold back. In the days that followed, the Caldwell household transformed in subtle but profound ways. Alexander became a constant presence in Ethan's life, attending school events, helping with homework, and sharing meals without fail. Their laughter filled the once silent halls, replacing the emptiness that had lingered for so long. Clara, too, found her place within the family, not as an outsider looking in, but as a partner in every sense of the word. Her influence extended beyond Ethan's care. She helped Alexander rediscover joy in the small moments, teaching him to savor sunsets, appreciate art, and cherish the beauty of imperfection. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan nestled between them. Alexander turned to Clara with a smile. "Do you remember what you told me that first night? About letting people in, even when it hurts?" Clara nodded, returning his smile. "How could I forget?" "Well," he said, taking her hand in his, "I'm glad I listened, because letting you in has changed everything for the better." As the sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, the three of them sat in contented silence, surrounded by the promise of a brighter future. They weren't just a father and son, or a nanny-turned-guardian. They were a family, bound by love, trust, and the courage to start anew. The months that followed marked a profound transformation for the Caldwell household. Alexander, Clara, and Ethan settled into a rhythm that balanced structure with spontaneity, discipline with affection. Their lives became an intricate tapestry woven from shared laughter, quiet moments of connection, and the unwavering support they offered one another. Yet, beneath the surface of this newfound harmony, unspoken feelings between Alexander and Clara continued to simmer, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. Alexander's dedication to his son grew exponentially as he embraced his role not just as a provider but as a present, engaged father. He made it a point to carve out time every day for Ethan, whether it was helping him practice multiplication tables, teaching him how to ride a bike without training wheels, or simply sitting together on the couch reading comic books. These small acts of involvement brought them closer than ever before. Clara remained at the heart of their daily routines, guiding both Alexander and Ethan through challenges while celebrating their victories. Her influence extended beyond caregiving. She helped Alexander navigate the complexities of parenting with patience and humor, reminding him that mistakes were part of the process. In turn, Alexander leaned on her wisdom, trusting her instincts implicitly. One afternoon, as they prepared dinner side by side in the kitchen, Alexander glanced over at Clara chopping vegetables with practiced ease. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I used to think being a good father meant providing everything materialistically. But now I realize it's about showing up. Emotionally, physically, completely." Clara smiled warmly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "And you've done exactly that. Look at how far Ethan has come because of you." "It's because of us," Alexander corrected softly, his gaze lingering on hers. "We're a team, Clara. You've been my anchor through all of this." Her cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment, but she didn't look away. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, charged with emotions neither had fully articulated yet. Still, there was no denying the bond they shared. A partnership built on mutual respect, admiration, and something deeper that neither could ignore much longer. Despite their growing closeness, Alexander hesitated to cross the line from professional to personal. He feared disrupting the fragile balance they'd achieved, worried that acknowledging his feelings might jeopardize the stability they'd worked so hard to create. But one evening, during a rare moment alone, Clara decided it was time to confront the elephant in the room. They were sitting on the back patio after putting Ethan to bed, sipping glasses of wine under a canopy of stars. The night was cool and serene, the kind of tranquility that invited vulnerability. "Sir," Clara began, her voice soft but deliberate, "there's something I need to say." Alexander turned to face her, raising an eyebrow at the formality of her address. "Sir again? I thought we were past that." Clara chuckled nervously, twirling the stem of her glass between her fingers. "Old habits die hard, I suppose. But seriously, I can't keep pretending anymore." "Pretending what?" he asked, his tone tinged with concern. "That I don't have feelings for you," she admitted, her cheeks flushing crimson. "That I haven't fallen in love with you." The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. Alexander stared at her, momentarily stunned by the honesty of her words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. A genuine, heartfelt expression that lit up his entire demeanor. "You think I haven't noticed?" he teased gently, reaching for her hand. "Clara, I've been falling for you since the day you dared to challenge me about Ethan. You've changed my life, you've saved it. And if you'll have me, I'd like nothing more than to spend the rest of mine loving you." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as relief washed over her. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to hear those words until they spilled from his lips. Without hesitation, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their kiss was tender and full of promise, sealing the bond they'd nurtured over months of shared struggles and triumphs. With their relationship officially acknowledged, Alexander and Clara wasted no time integrating their lives further. They moved Clara's belongings into the master suite, transforming the space into a sanctuary that reflected both their personalities. Artwork created by Ethan adorned the walls, blending seamlessly with Clara's warm touches and Alexander's minimalist aesthetic. Their dynamic shifted naturally, evolving from employer-employee to partners in every sense of the word. Clara continued to guide Ethan's development, ensuring he thrived academically and emotionally, while Alexander supported her dreams of pursuing a degree in child psychology. Together, they envisioned a future where their individual strengths complemented each other perfectly. One weekend, as they strolled through the park holding hands, Ethan darted ahead chasing butterflies. Watching him laugh freely, Alexander squeezed Clara's hand tightly. "Do you ever wonder what Catherine would think of all this?" he asked quietly, referring to his late wife. "I do," Clara replied honestly. "But I believe she'd be happy, for you, for Ethan, for us. She gave you a beautiful son and a legacy of love. Now it's our turn to build on that." Alexander nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Thank you for reminding me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring the past while embracing the future. By the end of the year, the trio had become inseparable, a testament to the power of love and resilience. Ethan flourished under the combined care of his father and Clara, excelling in school and forming friendships with classmates. His once guarded demeanor gave way to confidence and curiosity, traits that mirrored the warmth of his new family dynamic. For Alexander, life took on a richness he'd never imagined possible. Work no longer consumed him. Instead, he prioritized evenings spent playing board games with Ethan or cuddling on the couch with Clara. Their home buzzed with laughter and light, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness that had defined it before. Clara, too, found fulfillment in ways she'd never anticipated. Not only had she helped heal a broken family, but she'd also discovered a love that filled the void left by her own difficult childhood. With Alexander and Ethan by her side, she felt whole for the first time in her life. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks painted the sky above the city, Alexander pulled Clara close, whispering in her ear. "To the next chapter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "With you and Ethan, I finally feel like I'm living, not just surviving." Clara smiled, resting her head against his chest. "Here's to forever." As Ethan cheered excitedly at the sight of the fireworks, the three of them stood together, wrapped in the glow of hope and happiness. They weren't just a billionaire, a nanny, and a child. They were proof that second chances exist, that hearts can heal, and that sometimes the greatest stories begin with the simplest acts of courage and love. 1 year later, the Caldwell household was a picture of warmth and vitality, a far cry from the sterile fortress it had once been. The sprawling estate now buzzed with life, filled with laughter, creativity, and the unmistakable energy of a family thriving together. Alexander, Clara, and Ethan had built something extraordinary, a home rooted in love, resilience, and mutual support. On a crisp autumn morning, the trio gathered in the kitchen for breakfast, sunlight streaming through the windows and casting golden hues across the room. Ethan sat at the table, eagerly sketching pictures of rockets and dinosaurs, the same themes that had once adorned his mural with Clara. Now, however, his artwork was more refined, reflecting not just imagination but confidence. "Look, Daddy!" he exclaimed, holding up a drawing of a spaceship manned by stick-figure astronauts. "This is us going to Mars." Alexander chuckled, leaning over to inspect the masterpiece. "Impressive work, buddy. But don't forget the snacks. We'll need cookies for such a long journey. And milk," Ethan added seriously, nodding. "Lots of milk." Clara smiled as she poured orange juice into their glasses, marveling at how far they'd all come. Just a year ago, Ethan rarely spoke unless prompted. Now, his voice rang out freely, full of curiosity and joy. His transformation was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the power of connection and unconditional love. After breakfast, Alexander announced plans for the day, a trip to the park followed by pizza lunch. It was a simple outing, but one that held deep significance. These moments, ordinary yet profound, were what defined their new life together. No longer did Alexander prioritize board meetings or business deals above everything else. Instead, he cherished the mundane magic of being present for his son and wife. As they bundled up and headed outside, Clara linked her arm through Alexander's, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Do you remember when we first took Ethan to the park?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with nostalgia. "How could I forget?" Alexander replied, squeezing her hand. "That was the day I realized I couldn't do this alone, and that I didn't want to." Their shared memories served as reminders of how far they traveled, not just geographically, but emotionally. What began as fractured relationships marked by grief and neglect had evolved into a tapestry of healing and growth. Later that afternoon, as Ethan played tag with neighborhood friends, Alexander and Clara found themselves sitting side by side on a park bench, watching him run with boundless energy. The sight filled them both with pride and reflection. "I never thought I'd see him like this," Alexander admitted softly, his gaze fixed on Ethan. So, alive. It's because he knows he's loved? Clara said simply, resting her head on his shoulder. And because you've shown him what it means to be strong, not just in success but in vulnerability. Alexander sighed, remembering the man he used to be, distant, detached, and paralyzed by fear of failure. I owe so much to you, Clara. You taught me how to open my heart again, to him, to you, to myself. And you've taught me that love isn't about perfection, Clara countered gently. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, about choosing each other every single day. Her words resonated deeply, reminding him of the vows they'd exchanged months earlier during an intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Standing beneath a canopy of fairy lights, they promised not just to love each other but to nurture the bond they'd built together. A promise they renewed daily through actions rather than words. As dusk settled over the park, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Alexander called Ethan back to join them. Together, the three of them strolled home, hand in hand, their breath visible in the cool evening air. When they reached the front door, Ethan paused, looking up at his parents with wide, trusting eyes. Can we play catch tomorrow? He asked hopefully. Absolutely, Alexander replied, ruffling his hair affectionately. And maybe build a fort afterward? Yes, Ethan cheered, darting inside to retrieve his mitt. Clara watched him go, then turned to Alexander with a soft smile. You've done amazing things for him, you know? So have you, Alexander said, pulling her close. For both of us. They stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other's arms, savoring the quiet beauty of their lives. Behind them, the house glowed warmly, its walls no longer barriers but invitations. To love, to trust, to begin anew. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of possibility and the promise of tomorrow, Alexander and Clara knew they'd created something lasting. Their story wasn't just one of redemption or second chances. It was proof that even the most broken pieces can be mended with enough patience, courage, and love. And as they stepped inside, ready to face whatever lay ahead, together, they carried with them the certainty that their best days were still to come.